Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Facebook Live program from here in the Office of Admission at Texas Christian University. My name is Heath Einstein. I'm Dean of Admission at TCU, and so excited to welcome you this evening. It's great to see so many friends with us. We've got Ken from here in Arlington, who I assume will be watching the World Series right after we're done here. We've got Melanie from Richmond, Virginia, and we've got Alyssa down in the Woodlands, the Houston area. We've got Brian from Murfreesboro. We've got, I love seeing this. We have someone here from Todd from Huntington Beach, California, that is right next to Fountain Valley, which is where I grew up. So welcome, Todd, and all of our friends in Orange County. Awesome to have everyone here. If you haven't already been thinking of your questions for tonight, this is a hot topic, financial aid and scholarships. Please put them into the chat now. We're going to get to as many as we can. We always start all of our programs with a land acknowledgement, as you know, if you've been with us before. So we pay homage to all Native peoples who have lived on this land since time immemorial. We pay particular tribute to the Wichita and affiliated tribes, upon whose ancestral homeland TCU sits. And if you have a chance to see the monument erected to the Wichita and affiliated tribes between Reed Hall and Jarvis Hall, right in the heart of our campus, please go and check that out. Okay. If you've been with us for these events over the past 3 years, you know that these are unscripted. So we never know what we're going to say. That's what makes it fun for the next hour or so. We're going to chat for just a minute. And I say I'm going to introduce my special guest here in a second. And then we're going to open it up to the Q&A. So please don't hesitate to place those questions in the chat now. We're going to go right up until about 7 o'clock Central if we can, if we have enough questions. If we don't, that's okay too, but we're really here for you to answer any questions that you have. I also want to express my gratitude to a few folks who are behind the scenes right now. You don't see them on your screen, but they are here. Rob Berline, who is Assistant Director of Marketing and New Media in the Office of Alumni Relations, as well as Liz Rainwater, who runs marketing and communication for the Office of Admission, and Lauren Foley, who works in our financial aid office. Lauren and Liz are going to be answering questions in the chat for you. And that's about it. By the way, if you are not aware, this is an award-winning program. Always like to point that out. Okay, so today, as you probably know, it's November 1st. And if you are a senior in high school or the parent of a senior in high school and you're looking to start your journey at TCU next fall, then you might have submitted an application because today is the deadline for both early decision round 1 and early action. And we want you to know that first, we want to thank you for your interest in TCU. And we also want to let you know that if you did meet today's deadline, you will hear back from us pretty soon. By January 1st is what we tell people, and that is what we do. So you're not going to get a decision tomorrow. You're not going to get a decision next week, but you will get a decision relatively soon. As Tom Petty says, the waiting is the hardest part. So that's going to be your challenge for the next 6 to 8 weeks, but we will get you a decision. And also it's important to know that unlike some colleges, we get those decisions out in one batch, right? So if you applied early decision, all early decision students are going to hear at the same time. If you applied early action, all early action students are going to hear at the same time. We don't roll out decisions like some colleges do. So I just want you to be aware of that. Okay. I would like to introduce my very special guest tonight, Kiki Davey, who's an advisor in the financial aid office here at TCU. She is an expert on all things financial assistance. And hi, Kiki, how are you?
Hi, good. Thanks for.
Well, it's great to have you here. And maybe I don't know if you've got some initial thoughts to lay out for our guests before we get to our questions, but what would you like to share with everybody?
I was thinking a few things about financial aid terminology that they may not be aware of or that they're running across as they're doing applications coming up for financial aid, and make sure you guys understand what that means and how that works just in general for that. Something most common that you would have heard is the cost of attendance, right? Because everyone wants to know how much is it going to cost. So COA, cost of attendance, it's an estimate of the education costs for the year. Most schools are going to publish that per year. And it's what's included in that overall cost of attendance is determined by the Department of Education. And that includes tuition, fees, housing, food, books and supplies, transportation expenses, miscellaneous, and personal expenses. So within all of that, all of those components, there's two types of costs, indirect and direct costs. So what's getting paid directly to the school, those direct costs, tuition and fees, if living on campus, housing and food, some of the books if they're covered, or those indirect costs where it's still something you're going to pay out of pocket, but it's not going to school directly. It's going for, getting to school, those flights, the driving, and those miscellaneous and personal expenses that you have to spend, setting up your dorm room or those extra meals for late night study sessions, things like that. And so that's important to know kind of what you're going to end up paying directly to the school, and then kind of what you will need to just as you go along so that you can budget properly for school. Something else that's really important is the net price. And we kind of call that your out-of-pocket costs. How much are you going to spend, from your pocket per month on a payment plan, per semester, per year, because that's a great way to compare schools and costs. But if you're applying to many schools or a few of them, so when you get your financial aid offer, you have an easier basis of comparing how much is that school going to cost versus cost and how much aid is going to come in. So you want to talk about net price, calculating that and using that as a way to, figure out what's in your budget for that as well. We do have a net price calculator, and we can link to that website in the chat. That's a great way to input some information and a tool that you can use to help figure that out. Just very handy. So it's just a couple of main terms that everyone should be familiar with from any school's website.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get to questions. This would be a good time to transition. And again, folks, if you've got questions about scholarships or financial aid, please don't hesitate to put those into the chat, and we're going to get to some of those. Brian asks, is there a place to look for major specific scholarships, i.e. data sciences major? So I'll start by just sort of generally speaking, talk about how we review for academic scholarships, and then maybe Kiki, you can talk about some more specifics and the search that we have that you have on your website. So every student who's admitted to TCU, Brian, is automatically considered for academic scholarships, and that is going to be based on a student's academic record. We look at the transcript, the grades that the student has earned, the curriculum and the strength of that curriculum that the student has chosen for themselves. If a student has submitted a standardized test, that might be a factor, although it's not necessarily a factor for every student. We look at the quality of the school that the student is coming from. And so it's unlike how we do admission to the university, which is a bit more holistic. We're looking at their resume and recommendations and so forth for admission to the university. But for scholarships, that is strictly based on a student's academic performance, and it's relative to the rest of the applicant pool. So what might have warranted a scholarship in 2021 may be different from what's going to warrant a scholarship in 2024 because the applicant pools are different. So I think that's important to know. So that's academic scholarship in general. And when students are given those academic scholarships, they're going to find that out with the offer of admission. Right there in that moment, it's going to be in the student portal waiting for them. Brian's asking about the major specific scholarships. So Kiki, do we have some general advice for students who may be looking at those types of scholarships?
We do have a scholarship search. The Horned Frog Scholar Search is a portal that was created that aggregates all of our different department dependent, like major dependent, GPA dependent, whole bunch of different criteria. There's about 150 different scholarships in there that you can search for, and there's one application for it. I will say that for many of these applications, it is for returning students. There are some for first years, so you can go ahead and take a look at that. But that's where you would search for based on a major and see if there was anything that you would be eligible for, your student would be eligible for, coming up in that following year after the first year. But you can go ahead and check it out for the first year as well. Applications open in January sometime. A lot of them do close throughout the spring. So you just want to get in there and check and see if there's anything that you can apply for. Absolutely. Because it's for the following year. It's the best way to do that.
That's great. Perfect. Okay, our next question. This is a really good one. It's a really good one. Very interesting, and I'm curious, Kiki, from your level of expertise. KP Copa asks, can you tell us what information the CSS profile provides that allows to calculate a student's need differently than the FAFSA? So maybe we start, if you can provide just basic definitions of profile versus FAFSA, and then, what's the information that's different that those forms are capturing?
Absolutely. So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. That is a online form. There are still paper ones around, believe it or not. That's the application to apply for federal grants and loans. So based on financial need, family size, things like that. This upcoming year, usually it opens in October, but for this current year application, which is for the 24-25 school year, it is not going to be available until December sometime. They've undergone a complete revamp, which has actually simplified the FAFSA and cut down quite a bit on the questions, streamlined it. It's going to be great. It actually will make some more students eligible for additional aid that they might not have been. We're really looking forward to this once it comes out. So it's a simplified process that is based on taxes and reported income and assets. The CSS profile, which is administered by the College Board, is what we use to determine financial need so that we can give institutional grants. So money from TCU here. And it is a much more in-depth financial application, asks for more details regarding family finances, about what resources are available to a family to use for school. And it also has a place where if there is some unusual circumstances going on currently that would not have been reflected in, previous year's taxes, that there's also a space to let us know that. So, it's just a little bit more comprehensive so that we can best determine how we can support that family and that student with our funds.
That's great, Kiki. And I think that what some families don't realize is that we give away far more money in institutional aid dollars than we do from the government. So Absolutely. That CSS profile is really important, right?
Yes. We highly encourage every family to apply using the FAFSA and the CSS profile, at least for the first year, just to see what you are eligible for, what we are willing to give to the student, because you're not, no family is exactly the same, and the calculations do vary, how that, affects the need that we can help with. And also it sets a baseline for if something does happen down the road, something unforeseeable like a job loss or a divorce, or, hey, a pandemic that lasts a little while. We didn't see that one coming. Then if circumstances do change with family finances, that we have a basis for that to kind of compare what it used to be to, the current situation, and we can go from there and reevaluate. So it really can be helpful just as an emergency in the background. Let's just do it and have it just in case, but also let's see what happens.
Yeah. And that profile, which is always important to TCU, perhaps even more so this year with the simplification of the FAFSA, that has not yet rolled out yet. We're still waiting on the government, but the profile is available for families to start filling out already, right?
Absolutely. It opened October 1st, so it is out there. That is what we will be using to evaluate for students who are applying early action, early decision, is that CSS profile. They would get an award offer early, next year. And then it would just be a tentative offer until we can get the FAFSA in as well. We will still require both, but we're going to go ahead and go off of the CSS profile so that they do get that information, that offer sooner.
Right. And you can see on the screen here exactly where to go to locate those forms and what codes you need to fill in for TCU. Those are the TCU codes for profile and FAFSA. Okay, let's move on to the next question, which Chance asks, and that is, can you apply for financial aid after acceptance decisions are made? So we know that the profile is open. We know that the FAFSA will be open soon. What would you say to Chance, Kiki, to the question of, could you just wait to apply for aid?
Yes, you can wait. It is not as advisable because we do have priority filing deadlines in order to help you make that decision based on having a financial aid offer. So by having your FAFSA and your CSS profile in early gives us time to see if we need more information from you so we can make that decision. If you were selected for verification by the federal government from the FAFSA, we require extra documents. And so in order to have that time to be able to do that, we always recommend getting that in by the priority deadline in February so that we have that time before you have to make that decision in May. But absolutely, you could decide and say you're coming and then be like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and file, my applications now. We will still see what is available and what you're eligible for.
Right. I know, having filled out financial aid forms in the past, how tedious it can be, but still needs to be done. So you might as well not put it off.
Exactly.
And then with FAFSA, can you talk about the process of data retrieval through the IRS and how that all works?
Sure. That is something that they are updating this year. They've not always, previous years, you have been able to bring in your IRS tax information from the previous year in order to fill out the FAFSA. And we know that that is verified, true information. You're not changing anything in there, and it lets us know that. It's super easy. And that will continue. What will change is that parents and students both need to provide or say that they approve of the FAFSA bringing in the IRS data now, and that they have consented to bring that in. This is a very important part this year and moving forward, is providing that consent to have the IRS data, because that will allow us, the Department of Ed, to finish calculating what the student's aid index is, what their eligibility and their need is. If you fill in your tax information manually, you're going to lose out on eligibility for some of those federal grants and other programs, basically. Mm-hmm. So it's just a new little component.
Right. And I suspect that for families who have never applied for aid before, it won't look any different because they don't know any different. But for families who've done this in the past with older children, then it might look a little bit different for them.
It'll look a little different. I've seen some previews of what the FAFSA form is going to look like online, and they've done a great job putting enough information so that you can follow the prompts of who needs to do what and where. Mm-hmm. One key thing is that you will need to have an FSA ID. That's your username and password for the student, and then for each parent contributor, which could be a bio, adopted, step parent, different scenarios of who needs to also have an FSA ID. So you can go ahead and do that now if you have, even though the FAFSA is not ready to fill out, it does take a few days to verify that information and make your identity for that ID. But then you'll be ready to go as soon as the FAFSA is ready to file. So we encourage you to go ahead and do that now. You've got another month-ish plus before the FAFSA comes out. We'll see how long it takes them in December.
Right. Okay. Gerardo asks whether aid packages can change over the course of 4 years. Another excellent question.
That is a good question. So yes, it can, because the FAFSA is going to need to be filed every year. The CSS profile only has to be filed the first year. So if your financial situation changes from year to year and tax year to tax year, because that's what's going on in your FAFSA, then your eligibility for some of those need-based funds could change. Also, there's the added component of meeting satisfactory academic progress, keeping your GPA up so that you're eligible to receive funds from either the federal government, state, or from us as an institution, or any other scholarship. Donors often have some set parameters for your eligibility. So yeah, it can change.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to pause here for a moment. Kiki, we've arrived at that time, this time that you've been waiting for. Okay, we're gonna give you our first dad joke of the night. Are you prepared?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. start off with one that I'll bet you that Liz behind the scenes she's like cracking her knuckles right now, ready for this one. Okay. What board game is popular in Prague? What board game is popular in Prague?
Checkers.
Yes. Well, I'm really proud of you.
Thank you.
Done. Okay. I'm just
my favorite cities.
It is one of the great cities in the world. And in about 20 minutes, we're going to make this a little tougher on you. I'm just preparing you right now. Okay.
Right.
But I think all of these tough questions that you're getting are really helpful in preparing you for these jokes also. So we're going to move on to the next one. Jamie Doyle asks, if you applied early decision, how does this affect your aid and scholarships? So I'm going to give a partial answer, and then I'm curious to hear from your side. Well, let me just ask you first, from a financial aid perspective, are you paying attention to if a student applied early decision, early action, regular decision? Does it affect the amount of need a student has or how we meet that need?
No, because we're looking at financial need for the most part on our side. You guys are looking at the merit academic side of things. So no, being early decision or early action does not come into play as a factor for that.
Right. And the same can be said about scholarships. And Jamie, I completely understand why you're asking this question. It's one we get fairly commonly from folks who are considering early decision, because with early decision, you are committing to attend TCU if you are admitted, and you don't know at that point what your scholarship and aid package is going to be. So there is a concern that a college might just say, well, gotcha, we know you're coming, so where's the incentive on our part to give you any scholarship or give you any financial aid? To which we would say, that's highly unethical. If your need suggests that we ought to be giving you X, Y, or Z, then that is what you're going to get. If your academic credentials warrant an academic scholarship, that is what you are going to get. So that's how we operate at TCU. Now, if your decision to enroll at TCU will hinge on the amount of money you're getting in scholarship and aid, then we usually discourage students from applying early decision because you're not going to know that. And you still will have a great chance to get in because most of our students who come to TCU do not go through that early decision route. The vast majority of students are coming in early action or regular decision precisely because most of our families are on some form of financial assistance and can't make the kind of commitment up front without knowing that information. So I think all of that's really important to know. All right, next, Samuel asks, is the CSS profile for international students accepted by TCU?
Yes, it is. That's what we would require from international students, is that they complete the CSS profile. And if we need additional information, we would ask for that as well, just documentation or something. But that's what we'll use to evaluate your financial need for any funds.
Yes. And by the way, Samuel, and anyone else out there who qualifies as an international student, international students are eligible for academic scholarship. They are eligible for need-based aid. We do not fund international students beyond tuition. So international students do need to demonstrate that they have sufficient funding to cover the cost of housing, food, other fees, and travel, and so forth, before they're going to be admitted to the university. But we do have scholarship and aid available for international students, rather. Okay, Krista asks, where do we apply for the CSS profile? Where can a student go to find that? I think we've got a screenshot that has a link, if I'm not incorrect. But also, generally speaking, Kiki, where would a student go to find the profile?
It's somewhere on the College Board website. So I Google CSS profile, and it'll be collegeboard.css profile, I believe, and it'll take you to that page to sign in, create an account. For the parents, if the student has taken SATs or ACTs, I think they might still have their login from that. You could, get that reset.
There it is. You got it.
Oh, I said it backwards. Right. cssprofile.collegeboard.org. There you go.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see. Gabriella asks, aside from the scholarships offered to transfer students based on GPA, are transfer applicants eligible for other scholarship opportunities?
Yes, that would be another group of students that I would suggest looking through the Horned Frog Scholar Search and seeing what they are eligible for based on GPA, major, being in a fraternity, sorority. There's so many different criteria because those funds a lot of times come from donors who say, hey, we want to support our students who do X, Y, or Z. And we just, you never know if you're going to qualify for one of those. So highly recommend taking a look at that. And then also just doing the FAFSA and the CSS profile to see if you're eligible for any need-based grant scholarships, federal work study. Student loans are part of financial aid, so also having some of that in there, and just seeing how you can make it work to attend here.
Perfect. Okay, Nancy asks, does early decision increase the opportunity for higher scholarship dollars? So sort of the reverse question that some folks ask. Some folks are wondering, does it decrease the opportunity? Nancy's wondering, does it increase the opportunity? And the answer is no. Regardless of when you apply, the scholarship is going to be exactly the same. I do want to make one other comment about early decision students, and the one way that they differ from our early action and regular decision students as far as aid goes. And that is, on the application for admission, one of the questions that's asked is, do you intend to apply for need-based financial aid? And if a student responds to that in the affirmative, that they do intend to apply for aid, then as a requirement to apply for admission to the university, we require students to fill out the financial aid forms. We want students to have gone through that process so that they can see their SAI and they can try to get a sense of what kind of need they have and how the university might meet that need before we will review them. It's really an exercise to support students so that you know exactly what you're getting into. It's at that point when many students will say, oh, you know what? I don't think I can make this commitment because my need is so great and I need to know if that's going to be met before I decide that TCU is going to be the school I end up choosing. So that is the one difference. It's not going to affect whether you get into the university or not, but you do need to fill out those financial aid forms if you check yes on the application for admission that you plan to apply for financial aid. Okay. Next question. Dennis asks, if we filled out FAFSA for an older child, do we need a new FAFSA ID for our current younger child? Ooh, that's a good one.
No. So the parent who was filling out the FAFSA whose information was used, you can still use that same FSA ID for you as the parent contributor. Your younger student now would need to make their own FSA ID. Every ID is unique to that person. So good question though.
Yeah. Susan asks, in a divorced family, which parent is completing the CSS and the FAFSA? And here's, and Kiki, correct me if I'm wrong, but this may be one of the changes we see in FAFSA this year, right? About who's who's completing the parent part? They've
updated their terminal or their definitions of who is completing it. If a parent, whichever parent provides more than 50% of the support for the student in that prior year. Right. If both parents contribute equally, then it is whichever parent has the higher income and assets.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's different from the old way, which was where the student lived the majority of the year.
Correct. Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yep. So they've simplified that. They're doing that in order to align more closely with how people claim dependents on their taxes and things like that to make it a little more simple, bringing in those IRS data points. Mm-hmm. But it's a good question.
Yeah, that's a really good one. To the next really good one, SM Steelman says, do you get favored considerably the earlier you apply? I'm not sure if this question refers to admission or aid, so let's answer both of them. Kiki, from an aid standpoint, is a student given favorable consideration if they apply early?
We're just looking to see if you completed any documentation we needed by the priority deadlines. After that, it will be like, the next block of students that did not make it in by that deadline, then, we'll see what we have as far as funding, because sometimes from federal government point of view, we have limited funding, state funding, sometimes limited, on how much we can do if you don't meet that priority deadline. So try really hard to get in that priority deadline.
Yeah.
February.
Excellent. From an admissions standpoint, we have, as I mentioned, the following application deadlines. We just hit today's November 1, so that's for early decision round 1 and early action. When we get to February 1st, we have early decision round 2 and regular decision. Historically, it's been a little easier to get admitted to TCU if you're applying by one of our early deadlines. We have more students apply then, and that's when we give away most of our spaces. So if you're prepared to apply, then go ahead and do it. You still have about 5.5 more hours to meet the November 1 early decision, early action deadline. And if you're not ready, it's fine. You can wait till February 1st for admission. You see the financial aid deadlines on the screen, but for the admission deadline, February 1st is fine. But there is a slight statistical edge to meeting that early decision deadline. Okay, Angel has an excellent question. Should we create a parent or student account for FAFSA?
It's a trick question. You need both. The student needs one. They need their own FSA ID, username, password, and the parent contributor, which could be one parent, step parent, divorced parents, need to have their own FSA IDs as well. Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Okay. I want to get to a question that was asked a little bit earlier. And that is, let's see where it is. Oh, Dana asks, for the merit scholarships, must students meet every column of the qualifications listed or one of the three? So GPA and SAT, or GPA or ACT or SAT. Okay. And I think what Dana's referring to is on our website, we list out some averages of students, or ranges that students have when it comes to GPA and test scores at each of the scholarship levels. And the answer is we don't have cutoffs, precise cutoffs. That is, it's not a guarantee that if you hit the marks that are on our website, you're necessarily going to get the scholarship, or that if you don't hit those cutoffs, you're necessarily not going to get the scholarships. What that chart is intended to do is to illustrate where a student might be competitive for those scholarships. And it's always a little tricky because they're a year behind. And again, each applicant pool being different, those can go up or down every year. And then the other thing is, the GPA that we use is not necessarily the same GPA that you see on your high school transcript, because every high school will calculate GPA a little bit differently. Some will have weighted, some will have unweighted. Some will have a 100-point scale, some will have a 4-point scale, some will have a 5-point scale. Those who weight will weight it differently. Some weight differently for AP versus dual credit classes. So the point being is that chart is meant to be an indicator, but not definitive. And so you'd like to hit as many of those points as possible and exceed the averages. The higher you go, the better your chances are to get an academic scholarship. There's a bit of a sliding scale to it. In other words, if you had a 4.0 and a 34, and somebody else might have a 3.8 and a 35, but you might end up getting the same scholarship. So there's a bit of a sliding scale to it. Okay, hope that answers, Dana, I hope that answers your question. All right, next, Heaven asks, when applying test optional, are merit scholarships based on GPA only? This is a great question. First of all, let's define test optional for TCU. If you've been with us before, you probably have heard me say this, but it bears repeating. TCU has what I think is among the more progressive test optional policies out there. We call it do no harm. And what we mean by that is the submission of test scores will never hurt a student's chances of admission, nor will it hurt their chances for scholarship. We would never hold a test score against a student, even if it's sub-profile for us. So that's our way of trying to help families take the guesswork out of whether or not to submit standardized test results. If you've got them, go ahead and submit them and trust that we're going to use them or not use them in a way that's going to shine the brightest light possible on the student. That's what we aim to do. For students who either submit scores and we don't use them or choose not to submit them, then yes, we're only going to be looking at the GPA, curriculum rigor, school, et cetera. We'd be doing an academic assessment absent the test scores, and it's going to put more weight on the other pieces of the academic assessment. So it will sort of amplify those other areas. Just to put some numbers behind this, and I think we've got a graphic to show this, the percentage of students who are scholarship recipients. You remember that I said that you could submit a score and we might not use them. So of those who received scholarships last year, 27% had test scores that were used in the factoring of a scholarship. 42% submitted scores, but we didn't use them. And then 31% just didn't submit scores at all. So you can see roughly 3/4 of students who got scholarships to TCU last year were not having test scores considered, whether they chose not to submit or they submitted and we didn't use them. So it's highly possible for a student to have their assessment, have their academic credentials assessed, and us provide a scholarship for a student just using a student's GPA and absent the standardized test results. So I think that's a good illustration of how we're not overly reliant on the standardized tests. They can be helpful in us understanding a little bit about a student, but I think we'd all agree that there's more to who you are than an SAT score or an ACT score. We certainly feel that way, so hopefully you feel that way too. Okay, Kiki, it is time for another question. I hope you're ready. And by the way, folks, please keep asking questions. Put them in the chat. We're really enjoying, this time is flying by, we're enjoying answering your questions. So go ahead and ask, keep asking. Okay, Kiki, I've given you enough time to prepare. How did Vikings communicate with each other? This is tougher. I will grant you that, but I think you can do it. How did Vikings communicate with each other? They used a little system called Norse code. Okay, you like that one, right?
I like that one. I come from a very punny family, so I appreciate it.
Okay, you can tell your family that one. They used Norse code.
I'm going to steal it.
Please do. Please do. Okay. I've got a question for you, because you, as a financial aid advisor, you're in the trenches working with students and parents every day. What is maybe a common misstep you see families make, or maybe some advice that you could give, something that families would wish they knew but don't maybe know right now, based on some of the conversations that you have with students and parents?
There's a couple. I think one is parents assume that they make too much money or maybe have too much in assets and that they're not going to receive any need-based aid. Mm-hmm. And that's why we say, please at least do it the first year, just so you know, and you'd be surprised sometimes. And then also, I just feel like maybe in understanding how we look at financial resources, the family's expectation of having to pay for some of college and how are they going to do that. It's a conversation that they need to have with their student. And not just talking about, hey, this is the first year, but like, what are our out-of-pocket costs for all 4 years? Mm-hmm. And I mean, the worst thing I think you could do probably is let your child start something that you don't have the finances to finish sometimes. I know that would be really a sad situation. And unfortunately, it does happen sometimes. Life gets in the way. But having those conversations about loans and loan expectations and what debt means with your students as you're going through this process and looking at your award offers coming in. And that's why I say out of pocket costs, like whether that's taking out loans in the students' names, the parents' names, both names, like how is this going to work? And just being realistic and having that frank conversation will save you a lot of heartache down the road or miscommunication, just the expectations between parents and students. I think people walk away sometimes and have to have the conversation in a very uncomfortable time frame instead of in the planning phases still.
Yeah. I always say, Kiki, that the most difficult conversations that I have with families are at the end of the cycle after they've been admitted and they come to the realization that it's not going to work out. And, you think the hard conversations with the family where the student isn't admitted, and that's not fun, but it's often with the student who is admitted and they just can't make the finances work. That's really painful. And sometimes having conversations on the front end where the parent can say to the student, look, here's the amount of money that we are able and willing. And by the way, those two aren't always identical, being able to pay for something and being willing to pay for something. And that's okay. It's every family's decision. That's not for us to decide. But this is what we are willing to pay. This is what TCU costs. And so you need to make up that difference in scholarships or work study or a summer job or what have you. Having that frank conversation at the front end of the process can really help save a lot of heartache, wouldn't you say?
Yep.
Good. Okay. Let's see. Gok Fam asks, is there any advantage if having AP scores in applying? So I would say the advantage is having the AP class, because that suggests to us that you have a demanding curriculum, which is preparing you for the demands of the TCU curriculum. Of course, if you've got a strong AP score, then that can help you earn credit once you're at TCU, which will give you advanced standing. Having that AP score isn't going to be quite as helpful in the application process. We're looking more at your grades in those classes. Okay, Dana asks, are scholarships stackable? Kiki, we were talking about this before, and this is like that age-old answer, right? What's the answer here?
It depends.
It depends, yeah.
So it depends on what's still, what kind of aid you're already receiving, how much of you have room still in your budget and your cost of attendance if you've already exceeded that. Sometimes outside scholarships have set parameters that they can only be used for tuition and fees, but if you're already getting that covered, maybe that's not possible. So it really does depend. Once you do have an aid offer, please contact us and we can talk about that more specifically. Also, something for TCU is that you need to grant access to the parents so that they can talk to us once you get accepted. And that way we can have those conversations with the details, down the road. So that is something that you will get communications about after getting accepted to TCU.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Burfamar asks, is there a minimum income per family per year to receive financial aid? And I think this sort of goes back to the point you were making earlier about you sort of never know, right?
Right. What the FAFSA is looking at as far as need-based aid and stuff is income, assets, what's reported on your taxes, poverty levels for the state that you are a resident of, how many members of your family, dependents, things like that. So there's a lot of different moving pieces to whether or not you're eligible for need-based aid, and then also filling out the CSS profile. There's a lot more information. So there is not necessarily an income cap to where it's not worth it, because you don't know, maybe you have a higher income but less assets, or maybe you have lower income and more in assets. It really does depend how it's all reported.
Right. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, some of the changes in FAFSA this year. I think some of the other big changes, and this came to mind as you were talking about number of dependents, no longer will FAFSA take into consideration the number of dependents who are in college at the same time in creating that student aid index, which is interesting. But that the folks who put this all together swear it's not going to adversely affect families. So there's that. I'm trying to think of they have expanded Pell eligibility for this year. What are some of the other big things that families might be on the lookout for?
I think that was the big one with all the case studies we looked at and numbers that were ran. Students actually ended up, for the most part, getting a higher amount of Pell eligibility. And also something that changed is called like the enrollment intensity. So the Pell is instead of just part-time, half-time, full-time, and you get 25%, 50%, 75%, they're now going by exact credit hours. And in all of the scenarios that we looked in, it actually was more beneficial to the student as well. So that was something nice, because I was worried it would skew to being less beneficial for the student. But so it looks like that's going to help. They simplified some of the process for those with a parent that was deceased from being in armed forces to get that max Pell eligibility. Just some things that they streamlined a little bit in that area as well.
Right.
Yeah, you hit the main one is going to be the number of family members in college, and then just who the parents reporting information is.
Yeah. Well, and actually, and I didn't see this question come through when I asked that question, but Christy asks, with the FAFSA changes this year, will TCU still factor in aid for families with more than one child in college? So I don't know if you might not have had any conversations about that internally, but since the students' aid index isn't going to be affected by that, will colleges be thinking about that and making adjustments based on that information?
It's possible, because for incoming first years, filling out the CSS profile, you still have a space to say whether or not those students, other students in your family, are in college. And that might be something that we will take into consideration. That is something that is still being discussed between our executive director and the board. And like, as they're working out, budgets for next year and stuff coming up soon, make some decisions about that. That's one of the things that they are probably discussing is, how do we do this now?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Natalia Garcia asks, do international students get more or less financial aid? And I'm not sure if you personally work with our international students. So I'm not sure if that question.
Not personally, but I do see a lot of international students getting financial aid, need-based aid, academic aid coming in more or less.
I would say let's start from here. Being an international student is not going to penalize you in any way as far as receiving financial aid. As I mentioned before, international students do have to demonstrate a minimum of money because we don't give more than tuition, but a fairly high percentage of international students are on some form of financial assistance. So I don't know how the average package compares, but it's really a different sort of pool of money that we're drawing from for our international families.
And it's going to look different because international students are not eligible for federal financial aid, state financial aid, or the majority of loans like federal, state, or even a lot of private loans are for U.S. citizens or eligible non-citizens. There are some private loan companies that will do private loans for international students, but they have very set criteria. So just the options that are even available look different, but I think we still do the best we can to support our international students coming over.
Yeah. Okay. Mary Rojas Ramirez asks, what if the parent still has student loans? Is this a consideration in financial need? This is a really good question.
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I do not believe that is ever something that's reported even on the CSS profile, whether or not the parent has their own student loans. Realize that we're heading back into repayment with those federal loans now, but that's not something that we're going to take into consideration, that you're still paying on yours. I understand that pain though.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. We know that our international students will fill out the profile. They don't fill out FAFSA. They're not eligible for federal funding. What about undocumented students? What are the forms that those students would use?
They would still want to fill out the FAFSA. They are making some arrangements for the 24-25 school year that will make it easier for undocumented students and or parents in order to be able to fill out the FAFSA and have that FSA ID. Previously, you had to have a social security number. Now the student, actually, I think the student still has to have a social security number. But if the parents don't, there are other ways to have them be able to fill out their information.
Sure.
Same thing on the CSS profile, they can still fill it out, and then we would follow up with additional documentation if needed for that, if they weren't able to complete everything.
And if those students are living in Texas, could they fill out TASFA?
They could, yes, you're right. So if they are not eligible for the FAFSA, so that also depends on just non-citizenship status. If they don't fit that criteria for FAFSA, they go ahead and do the TASFA, which you're absolutely right, Texas application for student aid. And then we will get in contact with them and tell them what else we need in order to complete that application.
Right.
And now it's available online for next year. So it's even easier. Fill it out one time, send it to all the schools, and then you probably have to submit additional documentation to each of the schools, but you just have to do the TASFA once. We love it.
All of this simplification.
I know, it's great. It's going to save us time to be able to focus more on the students.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that actually leads to an interesting question. Because of course, in admissions, we are only working with students who are coming into TCU. And I think folks in our office maybe sometimes lose sight of the fact that you are working with students in all of their years at TCU.
Yep.
So what
all
are
year round?
All year round, right? What are some things that maybe we don't even think about, or things that returning students have to do from an aid standpoint that students at the outset of their TCU careers aren't having to do, or maybe things that you had to do at the beginning that you don't have to do along the way? What are some of the differences as students move through their TCU journey when it comes to financial aid?
Question. So file your FAFSA, check your emails and your TCU portal to make sure if we do request any documentation that you get it to us in a timely manner so that everything processes in time. If you have scholarships, you have to do an award recipient information. There are a few things you still have to do if you are only getting a scholarship in order for that to process to your account. Check the Horned Frog scholarship search because maybe there are other funds that you're eligible for and you wouldn't know if you don't look for it. If you have any problems with your GPA, with dropping classes, if you have any questions like that throughout the year and you're not sure if it's going to affect your financial aid or if you're going to end up owing some money back because you dropped classes, please come talk to us first and we can help you sort through how this will affect you if you drop a class or, just things happen. If you have questions, ask us. We would rather you ask us before you make a decision that might affect your financial aid.
That's a really important point because to be considered a full-time student at TCU, you have to have at least 12 credit hours. And if you drop below 12 credit hours, then you may be risking your aid eligibility, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so most students will take, on average, 15 credits a semester, 5 classes times 3 credits each. That's sort of a typical curriculum at TCU. So if you had to drop one class, okay, you're still at 12 hours. But if you started at 12 hours and have to drop a class, now you could be in some trouble when it comes to aid disbursement.
Yeah. Just something to be aware of. Students forget. It's very easy.
Well, and it's a good message to send about checking checking emails and however the university tries to communicate with you as a student, it's important that you are checking that and responding. If you don't fill out forms that we need, that can cause havoc in signing up for classes for the next semester, for example. There could be holds that are put on your account, and you don't want to fall behind in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, this time's already stressful enough. That's something little, just being proactive with your email and communications and making sure you let all family members involved know what they need to do, when they need to do it, turn things in, can really save you a lot of stress and hassle like down the road,
Yeah. Okay. Natalia asks, can you apply for scholarship after being accepted, or do we have to do that at the same time you apply? So, Natalia, when it comes to academic scholarships, we are reviewing you for that automatically. That's not even something you have to apply for. We are going to award a scholarship based on the student's academic credentials, and you'll find that out with the offer of admission. There's one exception to that, and that is the Chancellor Scholars Program. That's our full tuition scholarship, and students must apply to the John V. Roach Honors College in order to be considered for the Chancellor Scholars Program. So that is something you do have to apply for, and you must apply by November 15th for the Honors College. You have to meet our early action, early decision deadline of November 1st, that application for admission, and then in the student portal, you'll see a link to the Honors College application. That's due the 15th of November. And then anyone who applies for the Honors College by then will be considered for the Chancellor Scholars Program. But aside from that, you don't have to apply for academic scholarship. Now, if it comes to one of those other scholarships that Kiki was talking about by using the Horned Frog Scholar search, that you can look at anytime. And so you could apply as soon as you are eligible. As Kiki mentioned, many of those are for our returning students, but it doesn't hurt to look at that. And of course, you should always be looking at outside sources of scholarship as well. Kiki, are there certain places you refer students to for searching for those external scholarships?
I know the College Board has a search engine for it. There's one that had a weird name. I would just be cautious of any site that asks for too much personal information. And I would look in your local community foundations in your area, again, from your school, see if there's anything else you can do there. There's, a variety of places you can look for scholarships. Google is going to be one of your best friends for that.
Yeah. I always recommend fastweb.com. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Yes. I'm like, it has nothing, but it has no scholarship in the name. But
right,
yes,
exactly. Yeah. It's just a scholarship repository that, has a searchable. And yes, and you want to stay away from anything that charges you money.
Yes.
Right. I mean, because why would we be, aside from the CSS profile, why would a like this private scholarship charge you money to get money? That just seems a little weird.
Yeah. Or any website that asks for funds payment in order to do a scholarship search for you. You can go ahead and do that on your own. You should not be paying somebody else to look for those for you. But yeah.
All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time. Came up on the hour. This was fun. Thank you so much for staying in the office late tonight, Kiki. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I mean, we are here for our students. Email us, call us if you have questions, set up appointments. We want you to have the information that you need in order to make a decision about coming to TCU.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a great evening. Let us know if you've got any questions. You can always reach out to the Office of Admission at frogmail@tcu.edu. You can call us at 817-257-7490. Have a wonderful evening. And as always, go Frogs.